Hey guys, my name is Zach, and today I'll be doing a tutorial on how to create an enemy for our platformer game and interacting with our characters. So we'll be able to kill the enemy and he'll be able to kill us. First off, let's go ahead and head over to the asset store and get some art for our enemy characters. You can search for Monster Creatures Fantasy or just use the link in the description to get to this. I'm going to download this here and import. Perfect. Now that we have that downloaded, there should be a new folder here called Monsters Creatures Fantasy. And in here we're going to go into the sprites and we're going to use the mushroom. So let's head back over to our scene tab at the top here. And just to start off, we're going to take this idle animation and we're just going to drag it into the scene here. We're going to call this Monster Idle. Save that. I'm going to size it up. I think we set our character scale to 4, so we'll do the same here on the X and Y. Wow, that's kind of big, so I'm actually going to shrink them a little bit. Let's try 3. Alright, now we've got a little knee biter here. And if we play, we should see him do animations and stuff. Cool. He's actually still almost as big as our character. He's floating a little bit, so I'm going to size him down to 2. And there we go. Alright, next I'm going to actually move our character over a little bit so he's not starting off right next to him. So I'm just going to grab the character, go to the position on the transform here, and I'm just going to slide him over because I want him to start on the edge of the screen. And then for this idle image that we just put in here, I'm going to rename this to Mushroom. I'm going to give it a rigid body, 2D, and a collider 2D. And I'm going to shrink this. Ooh. I'm going to shrink just the collider box. Now if we hit play, he should fall to the ground and collide with it. Cool. Alright, so you'll see that when we created the idle animation, it created an animation called idle 0 and an animation controller called monster idle. Let's go ahead and actually make a folder for these sorts of things. So go ahead and highlight or go to the assets folder, and we're going to go to prefabs, and no, we're going to go to animations. We're going to create 2 folders here. So a folder for character and a folder for mushroom. And everything in here already is for the character, so we're just going to drag these into the character folder. Shift click to select all of them like that. Then we're going to go back into that sprites mushroom folder, and we're going to drag those 2 items into our animations folder. And we'll come back to make more animations later for that. And then we'll drag these into the mushroom folder. Now we want to give our mushroom an additional collider so that it can detect when he's been hit by the character's sword. So we're going to call this hitbox, and we're going to create another collider, sorry. So it's going to be a box collider 2D, and we're going to set trigger to true by checking this box here. This means that it won't actually like push the character away if he gets hit or anything. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit smaller than his actual physical collider. Now we also need to write a script for the enemy character. So let's go ahead and add a component here and type new script. And we're just going to name this enemy script. And we'll make this script so that it can be used by all of our different enemies instead of just this one specific enemy. So we'll go ahead and go here, click on the dots, go to Edit Script. This is going to open up the code for this in Visual Studio. And as you see, there's nothing in here yet, but that's okay. What we want to do here is actually add a onTriggerEnter method. So onTriggerEnter 2D. Now this means whenever something enters the trigger box for the mushroom, it will run this block of code. So, and it has the collision. So if the collision dot compare tag and we're just going to call the tag player sword. So if the item that collides with this character is the player's sword, then we're going to do this code. And we're just going to set game object. Actually, we'll do it this way. We'll set destroy game object. Now what this means is destroy my game object. Game object is a local variable that's stored as part of the mono behavior. And it just refers to the object that this script is attached to. So in this case, it'll be the actual mushroom enemy. So if the player sword collides with this character, destroy it. All right, so let's save that. And now we're going to make the player sword item exist. So in our character, we already have like this ground check item on the left here, which is a child of the character. So we're going to create another one. So right click on him, go to create empty, and call it sword. And we're going to give it a tag. So go to tag, add tag, and we're going to create a new one, and we're going to call it player sword. This text has to match exactly what we put in the code. So don't need that. In this collision, we search specifically for player sword. So that's what the tag needs to be. So if we go back to the sword and we tag this as player sword, now that we've created the tag, now we have to give the player sword a collision box. So let's add a collider, and I think circle collider. Circle collider 2D makes sense. And we'll adjust this in just a second. In order to know how big to make this collision box though, I actually want to change the sprite of the character. So if we go into our assets folder and go to, let's see, where did I put it? Martial Hero, Sprites, we'll see that he has an attack animation. And they have a bunch of different frames here. And I'm not sure which one we're using. So if I go to my character and I go to the animator tab, I can see my animator here. And I think I've added the fall animation since last we looked at this. But in the attack animation, we can see what animation is being played here. Okay, so if we click on the animation down here in the bottom and we take our character and drag it into this box where it says no model to preview, it will actually show the animation on there. We can now click play on here and see that he's using this animation. So looking at that, it looks like in our assets, Martial Hero, Sprites folder, that he's using attack 2. So in our scene, we're going to go back to our character in the inspector, and under sprite, I'm going to actually put this attack 2 for sprite in this image. So now we know exactly how big the attack animation is. So I'm going to go back into my collider that I just set up for the sword. So click on the sword. And I'm going to modify the collision box here to line up more with the attack. And it looks like a circle collider might not be the best for this. So I'm going to remove the circle collider and add a capsule collider, 2D. And we want this to be a horizontal capsule. We want to edit it. And so go back in here. Sorry, it's a little hard to click on these boxes sometimes. And slide this over here. But I also want to make sure that this fits the previous, or the next animation as well. So I'm going to go back to my character. I'm going to add attack 2.5 as the sprite. And I see that it still fits inside my collision box. So I'm okay with that. Now that we know how big the attack is, the sword is actually going to be a trigger also. So if we mark it as is trigger, it's not used by it. We're going to disable this. Okay. So I'm going to set the character back to his original animation of idle, I believe. So I'm just going to grab idle 0 and I'm going to put it in the sprite image of our character. And then in our character controller, so if we go down to this character controller script, go to edit script. In here we have an attack method. So as soon as attack method is triggered, we want to enable our sword. So right now I'm just going to call it, sword dot set active. Actually, I'm going to call it enable. And this is a method that we haven't written yet, but we're about to write. So we're going to go to the top first, and we're going to declare what our sword is. So private sword, it's a game object, so we have to declare its type, game object, sword. And right now it's not set to anything. So when we first start our game, our character needs to go find his own, need a space here, my apologies. He needs to go find his own sword. We will set sword equal, actually we need to get our child. So if we look at the inspector here, we have our child, we have our character, and we have 2 child objects. We need the second one because that's our sword. So if we go back to our code, we actually want to do the same thing we're doing for the collider. And we actually want to get child 1 because it's the second item in the list. And we just want to get game object. And then in our enable method that we just kind of called, we're going to write a new method, call it void enable sword. Let me change this to match the name that I just wrote for it. And this is going to do a couple things. So the first thing it's going to do is it is going to set sword to enabled. So set active true. Now this is the exact same thing as if you went to the sword object and you clicked the box to enable it or unclicked it. So if you set it to true, then it's enabled. If you set it to false, then it's disabled. Now to show you what that actually does with a character, it disables it completely. So if a disabled character is not rendered, so if you were to uncheck this for the character, he just goes away. I typed sword wrong, so that's cool. After we set it to enabled, we know our attack only lasts for a fraction of a second. So if we go to our animation, and that's in animations character, animation 1, we'll see that the length of this animation is 0.5. So it's half a second long. So what we want to do is after we enable it, after half a second, we want to disable it again because the attack is ended. So we're going to invoke a method. Now what this means is call this method in this amount of time. So we're going to call a method called disable sword, and we're going to call it in 0.5 seconds. Now we have to write that as well. So that's going to be void disable sword. And it's just going to be the inverse of this. So we're going to set triple click to copy the whole line, or to highlight the whole line, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and we're just going to set it to false this time. Now, if we play this, we should be able to, let me disable maximize on play. Now if we play this, we should be able to see this actually happening. So we have our sword highlighted over here. It doesn't exist currently, but when we attack, we should see, looks like it is missing an object. So let's see here. There's no game object attached to the sword game object. The script is trying to access it. Okay, so when we're getting, okay, so what we want to actually do is go to game object, because like I said earlier, this is a local variable that's stored in the object. The get child is already returning that object, so we just want the game object of that item. So let's restart this and see if it works. All right, so now if we press Control, we see our sword enables, but it doesn't get disabled. So it says character controller disable sword could not be called. Okay, let's take a look here. That's because I misspelled disable sword. So now we should see that this is called. So if we go in here and we hit Control, the sword is enabled, and then it's disabled as soon as the attack ends. So now if we move over close to our enemy, you'll see that he dies whenever we call that method. So whenever the sword item is spawned, he dies, which is exactly what we wanted. The problem I'm seeing with this is he dies before he actually gets hit by the sword. So we might want a little bit of delay between when we actually call enable sword and when it gets enabled. So what we're going to do is the same thing we did just a second ago. We're going to call invoke enable sword as a string instead of a method. And we're going to call it in 0.25 seconds. So in half a second, enable the sword and then disable it. So we need to change this to 0.25 as well, because it will disable the sword half a second later. So let's go here, try it again. It's a little better. Alright, one more thing I want to do to make this a little bit better is I'm going to increase the size of the mushroom again. I'm going to change it to 2.5. And then I'm going to click play to test out our new attack animation and the killing of the enemy. So press Control, and it looks like it didn't trigger it the first time. So let's try that again. Go in. Cool. So that's exactly what we want. Now we just need to actually make the enemy attack back and kind of hunt down the character. We will do that in a part 2 of this tutorial since it is running a little bit long. But if you like this video, please go ahead and leave a like and subscribe down below. If you'd like me to cover something in specific, please let me know in the comments down below. And thanks for watching.